If you tell anyone, I'll leave you in there until the bugs start eating you." That's what he whispered in my ear before all hell broke loose. My name is Martha Lou Jenkins. I'm 87 years old, and I'm from Jackson, in southern Mississippi. And what I'm going to tell you now, oh well, no one has ever had the courage to listen to the end. But today, I'm going to go as far as I can, because there are some things that if you don't get them out, they rot along with your soul. I was very young when he started teaching me things, as he put it. I didn't even know how to tie my shoes properly, but he thought I was big enough to learn. And who was I to argue with the master of the house, right? The one everyone called Grandpa Henry. But for me, he was never a grandfather. He was the black hole inside that house. And I was just another little girl who was too small to understand the size of the shadow he cast. The first time happened on a Sunday. The house smelled of roast meat and stale cigarettes. My mother had gone to visit a sick aunt. My father was gone as usual, and he stayed there with me. He called me into the back room, the one nobody used anymore, with the furniture covered in sheets. He said he had a present for me, and silly me, I went. Children go, don't they? Children trust. I remember sitting on the end of the bed, my legs dangling. He gave me a candy, to sweeten your mouth, he said. Then he said he was going to show me a grown-up secret. When I realized what this secret was, my stomach churned. I wanted to run away, but he held my arm so tightly that I felt his fingers marking my skin. "If you scream, I'll kill your grandmother's rabbit, and you know she only has him, right?" I knew it. Grandma loved that rabbit more than any of her grandchildren. I kept quiet. After that, he started repeating this little theater every chance he got, and each time he came up with a new excuse. "It's for your own good. You need to learn. Don't say anything to your mother, or she'll die of grief." His mind was a sick circus, and I was the tied-up trapeze artist who couldn't fall. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the day my mother saw me walking funny and asked what had happened. I thought about telling her. I really did. But then I remembered the rabbit. I remembered his tone, his way of threatening without raising his voice. I just looked at her and said, "I fell out of the tree, Mom." She believed it, because she wanted to, because it was easier that way. And that's why that afternoon, after everyone had left for church, he locked me in the old cesspit in the backyard. The pit was dry, thank God, but the smell was still there. The smell of rotting things, of dead animals, of abandonment. He threw me in there like it was garbage. He said I should learn not to be a liar, and he locked the lid with a brick on top. I stayed in there for days. I don't know how many. I lost count after the third. Time inside the darkness becomes something else. It seems like every minute becomes an eternity. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own thoughts and, every now and then, the lid opening a little for him to throw in a piece of dry bread. Water? Only on the third day. A little plastic bottle thrown in anyway. The body begins to accept hunger, but the head doesn't. I talked to myself, prayed, sang quietly. I tried to dig with my hands, but it was hard clay. And there, in that hole, is where I learned that there are things that hurt more than being hit. It's indifference, contempt, the certainty that no one will look for you. When he finally got me out, he bathed me as if nothing had happened. He gave me a plate of cold rice and told me to sit down at the table with everyone else. I looked at my mother's face, hoping she would notice something, anything, but all she said was, "You look pale, Martha. Have you been eating properly?" I said yes, because I had already understood the lesson, the same one he taught me every week. That night, I slept with the light on, because the dark was still inside me, and it wasn't going to leave anytime soon. If you've made it this far, well, leave a like, because what comes next is even worse, and I still have a lot to tell you. The next day, my stomach still hurt, but it was my head that didn't seem to stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hole again, and felt the smell of rot sticking to my soul. I pretended that everything was fine, that I'd just had a cold, that it was just nausea. I learned early on that anyone who shows weakness is an easy target, and in that house, my dear, there was no room for a soft girl. My mother kept looking at me strangely, but didn't say anything. I think she suspected it, but she was one of those who preferred not to know. The kind of people who closed their eyes because to open them would be to admit that they had failed, and failure, for her, was worse than any truth. My father, when he came over, only asked about dinner. He never looked me in the eye. Maybe he knew. Maybe he just didn't care. School was my only respite. But even there, things got heavy. I began to be too quiet, afraid even of simple questions. If someone asked where I lived, I'd just say Jackson. If they asked what I liked to do, I'd make something up. Because if anyone dug too deep, they'd end up finding the cesspit. And I didn't want anyone to fall in with me. One day, the teacher called me into the corner. She said I was distracted, that my drawings had become dark. I didn't understand what she meant. I just remember drawing a girl inside a box with an X on top. She asked what that was. I said it was just a joke. She didn't believe me, but she didn't do anything else either. She gave me the notebook back with a sad face, and that was that. Another chance that slipped through the hands of an adult, and as always, it was still there, like a shadow that lingers, that doesn't speak up, but never goes away. One day, he told me to clean out the basement. He said he had a lot of stuff piled up, and that I was the lightest, the only one who could fit between the shelves. I knew what he wanted. It wasn't dust that bothered me, but I went, because refusing was worse. I went with my legs shaking, the broom in one hand and my stomach in the other. While I swept, he locked the door. We stood there for a while, not long, but long enough to leave a mark. When he opened it again, he gave me a bag of bullets. He said I was getting better. It made me sick to my stomach in a way that only those who have been scared can understand. I went back to my room with the candies hidden in my pocket. I never ate any of them. I kept them all under the bed as if they were proof. Proof that it wasn't crazy in my head, that it was really happening. And then there were the nights. Because at night was when the house was silent, when every step became a scream, and every creak in the floor made my heart race. There were nights when I would feign fever, just so my mother would let me sleep with her. And even then, it was no use. He'd come just the same. He'd come in meekly, talking quietly, as if he were cuddling, as if it were normal. And my mother, next door, pretended to be sleeping too heavily to notice. Or maybe she really was sleeping the sleep of the cowards. I don't know. I do know that I felt every second like a nail driving deep. But not everything he managed to break. There was a corner inside me, deep down, where he didn't touch. It was where I made up stories, where I talked to myself as if I were someone else. And that other Martha was strong, she was smart, she said it would pass, that one day it would stop, that one day he would pay. This other Martha began to grow inside me, and it was she who made me do something that nobody expected. One day, hiding behind the house, I found an injured cat. It had a broken paw, it was dirty, it looked dead. I picked it up carefully, hid it in a box with cloths and started to look after it. I gave it milk, cleaned the wound with a wet cloth, and every day, before going to sleep, I would go there and tell the cat what had happened to me. Every detail, every word, as if he would understand. And I think he did, because he never interrupted me. He just looked at me, breathing slowly. It was this cat who gave me the courage to make my first real promise. One of those nights, I whispered to him, "When I grow up, I'm leaving. I'll never come back. And he'll see what it's like to be alone." The cat looked at me with that yellow eye, as if he was agreeing. But life has a way of getting in the way of even quiet plans. One day, the cat disappeared. I went looking all over the house. I asked my mother, the neighbor. I even cried. I only found out where he was when I went out into the yard. He, the old man, was sitting on the bench with a bag in his hands, and inside, the cat, dead. He said that cats were dirty animals, that they could spread disease, and that I needed to stop inventing affection. That day, something in me turned to stone. I didn't cry. I just looked at him with such cold anger that it scared even me, and inside, I swore something else. If one day I had the strength, if one day I had a voice, his name would never be heard again. After he killed the cat, it wasn't just fear that I felt. It was anger, the kind that doesn't go away even with time. It only grows like dammed water. But I was little, and an angry child is just a wounded animal hiding in the corner. There's nowhere to run, no one to talk to, and if you shout, the world pretends not to hear. The following week, he started calling me to help in the shed. It was an old building at the back of the land, where they kept tools, hay, things I can't even tell you what they were used for. Nobody went there, not even my mother. She said it was full of rats and cobwebs, but I knew the place well, and I knew he liked places where nobody came. He told me to sweep, organize, and hold the boards while he preached. I obeyed, pretending I wasn't shaking inside. Sometimes he would talk about the things he had done in the war, saying that he was a man of respect, that in those days nobody meddled in other people's lives. I just listened, with my eyes on the ground, and every time he got close, my skin would freeze, as if I knew in my head what was going to happen. One day, after one more of these helpings, I came home with a scratched leg and sunken eyes. My mother looked me up and down and asked if I had been playing in the woods. I replied that I had tripped over the wire. She just nodded and went back to the stove. She didn't give it a second thought, and that's when I understood. It wasn't that she couldn't see, it was that she didn't want to know, because knowing required attitude, and attitude is too expensive for those who live by swallowing their tears. At school, I remained quiet. I no longer even answered when the other girls called out. I became the odd one out, the one who didn't play, who didn't smile, who didn't bring a snack. The teacher, poor thing, would try to strike up a conversation, give me drawings, ask if everything was all right at home, and I answered with a nod, a crooked smile, because I already knew how to play the game of pretending everything is fine, the game of surviving. One day at the end of class, I forgot to bring a notebook. I ran back thinking there was still time. When I entered the empty classroom, I saw the teacher organizing some tests. She looked at me in surprise and said I could take my notebook. I went to my desk, picked it up, and as I was about to leave, she said quietly, "Martha, if you want to talk anything, I'm here." I just shook my head, and I never went back. At home, silence became a character. He would sit at the table with us, lie on the sofa, enter my room without knocking, and in that silence, he grew stronger. My grandfather knew exactly how and when to act. He never made a fuss. He never shouted. It was all in his own time, in his own calm, like someone making breakfast, as if it were routine. One night I was lying down, and I heard the door open slowly. The sound of the latch scratching cut me more than any words. I felt the mattress sink into my side, and I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. He put his hand on my arm, then ran it through my hair, and he stayed there, without saying anything, just touching me as if he were examining an old object, something worthless but still useful. I didn't move. I didn't take a deep breath. I just waited. After he left, I stared at the ceiling. My heart was beating too loudly to ignore. That night I made another promise, that if I ever left that house, I would never let any man touch me again. I would never pretend to be asleep again. I was never going to be anyone's thing again. But until then, I was still his. He made a point of reminding me of that every day. He'd walk past me, pat me on the back, smile. "That girl's a fast learner," he'd say to the others, and nobody got suspicious, because an old man with a soft voice and a hat on his head always seems harmless, until you know the smell of the cesspit. One afternoon he sent me to fetch firewood. He said he was running out, that I was the only one left in the house. I took the wheelbarrow and went to the back fence. The sun was high, but my body felt too heavy. Every step was a struggle, and it was there, among the trunks and dry branches, that I heard the neighbor calling. It was Mrs. Clara, an elderly woman who lived alone. She called me over for a drink of water and said it was too hot for a child to stay in the woods. I went into her balcony and sat down on the bench. She brought me a glass and stared at me with her small but attentive eyes. "You're very quiet, miss. Everything okay there?" I smiled slightly and shook my head. "Just tired." She didn't answer. She stared at me as if she was seeing more than she should. Then she said, "If you need me, I'll be right outside." That night I went to bed thinking about that. A door leaning against. It didn't seem like much, but for someone who lives with everything locked, it was almost a miracle. I didn't have the courage to go back there in the following days, but just knowing that there was someone who might see it made my breathing hurt a little less. That same week, he invented going to the market with me. He said he wanted to show me how to buy good meat. He told me to put on some decent clothes and said I looked like a beggar. We went on foot. On the way, he walked beside me like a normal grandfather. He talked to the others, said hello, laughed, nobody saw, nobody knew, and I, with my eyes on the ground, holding the bag and wanting to vomit. At the butcher's, he grabbed my shoulder and squeezed hard, as if to remind me who was in charge. The butcher asked if I was his granddaughter. He said yes, the favorite. He smiled, and I wanted to disappear. On the way back, my head was throbbing. It was no ordinary headache. It was the weight of everything accumulated. When we arrived, he handed me the meat and said, "Put it away properly. If it spoils, you already know the punishment." And I knew. That night, I feigned fever again. I said I was dizzy and wanted to go to bed early. My mother let me, and that was the day I had my first nightmare about him dying. I woke up sweating, with guilt and relief mixed together, and there, in the dark, I realized that my head was starting to plan things that I didn't even understand. The days began to look the same, as if I was stuck in the same time that never passed. I'd wake up knowing where he was going to send me, what excuse he was going to make, what look he was going to give me. There were times when I could even guess when he was going to appear behind the door. Living there was like walking through a labyrinth, where all the exits led back to the same place, and the name of that place was him. My mother continued to drag out her days with that expression of someone who can't see anything around them. I think she gradually lost her eyes. She began to avoid looking at me. When I spoke, she answered by looking away, and that hurt more than anything, because I knew she saw, I knew she understood. I just didn't want to carry the weight of my pain along with hers. I began to notice other things in the house. The way the neighbors avoided talking about my grandfather. The way Aunt Cora changed the subject when he appeared. The silence that descended on the conversation circles when he passed by, as if everyone knew there was something rotten there, but no one had the courage to touch it so as not to stink even more. It was on a Wednesday that he decided that I was old enough to learn how to cook properly. Until then, I'd only helped with silly things, chopping onions, washing dishes, sorting beans. But that day, he told me to wake up before the sun came up. He said he wanted the coffee ready when he came downstairs. And as always, he used that meek voice that seemed caring to others, but to me, it was a sheathed knife. I went downstairs with my eyes burning with sleep and my stomach churning. The kitchen was dark, with only a dim light bulb on. He was already there, sitting at the table with his arms crossed. He ordered me to fry the bacon, make the coffee, and heat the bread. I did everything without complaining, my hand trembling and wanting to disappear. When the bacon splashed grease and burned my arm, he got up slowly, came up behind me, held my hand tightly, and said softly in my ear, "Don't mess things up or you know where you'll end up." I stood there with the frying pan in my hand, feeling his hot breath on the back of my neck. I almost dropped everything. He went back to his chair and kept watching me, as if he were analyzing a bug. When I'd finished, I put everything on the table and tried to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. He pulled me close, looked into my eyes and said, "You'll go far, but not before you thank me." I let go slowly, as if it were possible to escape with just the thought. I ran upstairs to my room and locked the door. I lay down on the floor because the bed looked dirty just remembering him sitting there. I started writing in my school notebook. Not an assignment. I wrote his name and drew a line on the side like a cut. Then I erased everything. Fear was still more powerful than anger. The days got heavier. The food no longer went down. My body began to change, and he noticed. That's when it got worse. He started saying that I was becoming a woman, that I needed extra attention, that pretty girls needed to learn the value of silence. I pretended not to understand, but I did. Every syllable came with a warning. One evening, my mother asked me to do her hair. She hadn't done that for a long time. I sat on the stool and she stood behind me, running the comb through my hair slowly, in silence. When she'd finished, she said almost in a whisper, "He wasn't like that with your grandmother." It chilled me, because it was the first time she had said something that confirmed what I had always known, but she also made it clear that she knew, and she didn't do anything about it. The following week, he went away for 2 days. It was like breathing for the first time in years. I walked around the house at a different pace. Even the smell seemed to have changed. I slept a whole night without waking up sweating. I woke up without fear, but it didn't last long. When he came back, he was quieter, more meticulous. He said he'd been thinking about things. That same night, he called me into the shed. My legs were stiff. He locked the door and stayed silent for a while. Then he started talking about a place where girls learned how to behave. A boarding school, he said. But the way he spoke, it sounded like something else. He said he was going to send me there if I didn't start cooperating better, that it was getting difficult to deal with me. At that moment, I knew for sure that he was planning to disappear me, and I knew my mother wouldn't stop it. So I started thinking about running away. For real, it was no longer a child's promise. It was a plan. I was going to save some change, gather my courage, and hit the road at dawn. I just needed a chance. I began to walk more slowly near Mrs. Clara. One day, I dropped a little note on her gate. I didn't write much. I just said, "If I don't show up, I've been sent away." The next day, she gave me a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth. Inside was a folded note. I saw it. I won't pretend. That day, I cried for the first time in weeks. But it was a different kind of cry. There was anger, fear, and a spark of hope, because knowing that someone could see me changed everything. And when you feel that someone sees you, you start to want to fight. But as if he felt it, he intensified his advances. He even started showing up at school. He said he was going to pick me up, that it was safer this way. And there I knew, he knew I was moving, that I was no longer just a quiet doll, that I was warming up inside. It was during this phase that the bad dreams turned into hallucinations. There were nights when I woke up thinking he was there. I could feel his touch, his smell, his weight, but there was nothing there. Or maybe there was, but nobody but me could see it. At the end of that month, he called me into his room. He'd sent my mother to pick up some fabrics in town. He said he wanted to give me a present. I didn't go. I locked my room, hid in the closet, and stayed there until they heard him shouting my name through the house. My mother came back and asked what had happened. He said I was rebellious. And she said I'd been acting really weird. She looked at me like I was the problem. Little by little, I understood that I was on my own, and that, if I didn't act, he was going to swallow me whole. That night, I didn't sleep. I curled up in the closet until my body ached. Every noise in the house made me hold my breath. The sound of the clock on the wall, the heavy footsteps in the hallway, even the creak of the wood seemed louder. I tried counting backwards, repeating single words, anything to distract my mind, but she insisted on showing the scene I had avoided. The door opening, him waiting for me, my mother turning her face away. When the sun finally came through the gaps in the window, I came out of the closet with a crushed body and burning eyes. I went straight to the bathroom, washed my face, and fixed my hair as if I'd slept. I went downstairs and he was already in the kitchen. Sitting down, newspaper in hand, coffee on the table, he looked at me and smiled. That short, corner smile that didn't show any teeth. "Did you sleep well, miss?" I shook my head. I sat down and remained silent. He continued reading as if nothing had happened. My mother appeared soon after, asking if I wanted porridge. I said no. My upset stomach wouldn't let anything go down. She insisted, said I was getting too thin. He commented that girls who don't eat get sick and work hard. I didn't reply. I just wanted that moment to pass soon, like a rainstorm that you hope will end soon. At school, the teacher's eyes followed me for longer. She handed over an activity sheet and held my hand for a few seconds. I felt the difference in the touch. It wasn't curiosity, it was alarm. But as always, nobody did anything. Maybe they didn't know what. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Perhaps they already knew and preferred to leave it alone. And leave it alone is what kills the most people in this world. When I got home, I found my mother cleaning the living room. I asked her if she needed any help. She looked surprised, then nodded. I picked up the cloth, scrubbed the furniture, trying to look normal, until she said, almost without raising her eyes, "He was very angry yesterday." I pretended not to understand. "With me?" I asked. She only replied, "With the situation." That sent shivers down my spine, because calling everything a situation was her way of staying alive. If she gave it a name, it would be real, and if it was real, she would have to act. And action had never been her strong suit. At night I lay there listening to the sounds from downstairs, the cutlery being put away, the tap dripping, the chair creaking. He was still awake. I knew he slept late, like someone who guards the house. But what he was really guarding was the darkness itself, and I, trapped in my room, was just another object being watched. The next day, I went to Mrs. Clara's again. I didn't knock. I just left another note under the mat. I need to get out of here. I ran back before anyone saw. 2 days passed with no reply. I thought she'd gotten scared or given up. She was used to being left behind. But on the afternoon of the 3rd day, she found me by the well. She called me by name. She said she needed help carrying some cans. I went with her to the balcony. When she went inside to get the cans, she dropped a small bag near the bench. I picked it up in disguise and hid it in my apron. Inside were 2 folded bills, a cornbread, and a piece of paper with a phone number and an address. Underneath, just one sentence. When it's time, come. I put everything away in a little box that I hid behind a loose board in the cupboard. I slept with a strange feeling that night. It wasn't hope, it was urgency, the kind of thing that makes your heart beat faster even when it's still. But as always, he sensed it. The man seemed to have radar. He started hitting the obedience button harder. He said I was too loose, that it was time to get a grip. He spoke with his hand on my shoulder, squeezing slowly, like someone marking territory. Once, he pushed me against the wall, just to see if I still knew who was boss. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just looked him in the eye. And he didn't like that. He started watching me more. He told my mother that I was in bad company. He forbade visitors. He started locking the front gates. He said it was for safety, but I knew it. He was trying to cut off my breathing. One afternoon he sent me to the barn for hay. I went as usual. When I got back, he was waiting for me at the door. He said I'd been gone too long. That girls who disappear without warning need to learn discipline. He grabbed my arm and dragged me down to the basement. It was dark, stuffy. He told me to stay there, grounded, until he decided. He locked the door. I stayed there for hours, in the dark, listening to the world outside without me. I remembered the cesspit. I remembered the smell. I remembered the hole that felt like my soul. And in that basement I decided it was now or never. When he opened the door, with a sweaty face and half-closed eyes, I had it all in my head. I pretended to be weak and fell to the floor. He came closer, let his guard down. He said that this was what being stubborn was all about. And it was when he turned to get a bucket of water that I ran. I ran without looking back, without shoes, without thinking. I ran to Mrs. Clara's house. I knocked like crazy. She opened the door. She pulled me inside. She didn't say a word. She hid me in a back room. She said she couldn't keep me there for long, but that she was going to make a phone call. She did it in front of me. He spoke in a firm voice. "She's here. No, she's not coming back. If you want to do something, it's now." I spent the night there. I didn't sleep. My body was shaking. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Every rustle of a leaf made me jump. But for the first time, I felt that there could be an after. The day dawned cloudy, as if the sky was afraid to show itself. I was sitting in the corner of the room, my back against the cold wall, my knees pressed to my chest. I couldn't sleep a wink. All the time I thought I heard footsteps, his voice, his smell, but it was just my tired head, so used to being chased that I was inventing threats even in the silence. Mrs. Clara came in early, bringing a glass of warm milk and a piece of bread. I thanked her in a low voice. She knelt down beside me and ran her hand through my hair like someone who strokes a wounded animal. She said that she had called a cousin, that she knew some good people, that she could take me from there. He spoke slowly, choosing each word as if he feared I would fall apart in the middle of it. Except I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I stood there, listening, taking in every detail as if it were an escape map. After she left, I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. He could show up there, knock on the door, demand that I be handed over. My mother could come after me, feigning concern. They could call the police, say I ran away for no reason, that I was a rebellious teenager, because that's what they always say, isn't it? That the girl is exaggerating, that she's making things up, that she's dramatizing, as if the pain inside was just hysteria. Later the cousin arrived. She was a tall woman with a hard expression, dressed soberly. She spoke softly, firmly. She said she couldn't take me to her house, but that there was a safe place. a religious center where other girls stayed. She said that there I would have food, a bed, and instruction, that I could study, learn a trade, maybe even forget a bit about the past. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. I didn't care about the place. I just wanted to get out of the hole I'd been thrown into for years. I tidied up what little I had, a change of clothes, my school notebook, the box with Mrs. Clara's notes, and the piece of string where I used to tie up everything that still made sense. She covered me with a shawl, put a cap on my head, and we went out the back door, walking fast without looking back. The car was parked on the corner. We got in and drove off without a word. The road seemed long, even though it was so close. Every bend in the road made my stomach turn. My head was pounding with images of him, loose phrases, the smell of hay, the click of the door closing. The woman noticed my nervousness. She put her hand on my arm and said, "It's over. He won't find you here." I wanted to believe her, but fear lives deep inside, and it takes time to change its address. Once there, the iron gate creaked loudly. Inside, a simple courtyard, with a few girls sitting in a circle, others cleaning the floor, a building with small windows and thick walls. The woman introduced me to a nun called Sister Agnes. Her face was dry, her gaze direct. She asked my name, age, and if I had any health problems. I answered quickly, without raising my eyes. She told me that I would be safe there, but that the rules were sacred. No running away, no questioning. Obeying was the first step to starting again. I was taken to a room with bunk beds. I was given a mattress in the corner, a thick blanket and a towel. One of the girls showed me where the bathroom was, the cafeteria, the chapel. I said little. I observed a lot. I noticed that everyone had the same tiredness in their eyes. It wasn't physical tiredness. It was that other kind that lives in the soul. For the first few days, I followed orders. I woke up at 5, did my chores, prayed, studied what I was told. I ate quietly and slept without saying a word. My body got used to it quickly, but my mind was still on alert. Every night, before going to sleep, I would mentally go over my route to the gate. Every step, every crevice, every escape route, just in case. A week later, I received a visit from Mrs. Clara's cousin. She said that my mother had come by. She came crying, asking if I was alive, saying that her grandfather was ill, desperate, that the house wasn't the same without me. I didn't answer anything. I just asked if she had told me where I was. She denied it. She said that my mother didn't need to know, that sometimes blood can be deceiving, that protecting isn't always the same as forgiving. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling anger and longing mixed together, because part of me still wanted to understand why my mother didn't get me out of there, why she let so much happen. But the other part wanted her never to touch me again. I started writing in my notebook. I wrote down everything I remembered. Name, date, feeling. I wrote so I wouldn't forget, because one day someone would have to know. And when they did, I wanted to be prepared, not to cry, but to point the finger and say, "This is what they did to me," and nobody stopped me. Some girls started talking to me. They spoke quietly, always looking away. They told bits and pieces of stories. One said that her father beat her when she got the names of the farm animals wrong. Another said that her mother sold her body and let the men choose who else they wanted to play with. Each story was a stab, but also a mirror, because there, among broken girls, I realized that the pain was collective, that silence was imposed in series. I began to help more, looking after the younger ones, teaching them to read. And there, among those children with deep-set eyes, a desire was born in me that I had never felt before, to protect. Not because anyone had taught me, but because I knew what it was like to be left alone. It was around this time that I overheard a strange conversation. 2 nuns were talking in the corridor about a man who had been seen hanging around the area. They said he seemed confused, that he wanted to know if a Martha lived there. My blood ran cold. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed the hidden box, read the notes again, the phone number, Mrs. Clara's sentence. I got ready to run, but he never showed up. And the next day they said the man had left, that he seemed drunk, that he was mumbling nonsense. I was on alert for weeks, until time passed. Fear became a silent watchman, but not a paralyzing one. Time in that place didn't follow the rhythm of the world outside. The days were all very similar, full of exact routines, timed tasks, silence where there should be conversation. It was a way of maintaining order, but also a way of hiding what they didn't want to come out. Each girl who arrived was greeted with the same neutral expression, with the same promise that it would be different there. But nothing changes overnight. The pain we bring from home comes with us, hides in the folds of our bodies, and only appears when we least expect it. I tried to adapt. I followed the rules, did what they asked, smiled when it was safe. Inside, it was still a battlefield. There were days when everything seemed too calm, and that made me restless, as if the storm was just waiting for the right time to return. I learned to live with this tightness in my chest, this feeling that something could always go wrong. A month after the attempted invasion, Sister Agnes called me to talk. She said they'd received a phone call, that my mother wanted to see me. She thought it was important for me to hear what she had to say. I asked who had authorized the conversation. The sister said that it was my right, that no one was going to force me to do anything, but that sometimes a conversation changes more than time. I looked at her and replied that no amount of time can change those who choose to pretend they don't see. The night before the meeting, I could barely close my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the white wall, as if it were a screen on which my head projected scenes I'd tried to forget. I saw my mother crying. I saw him again with that sick look in his eyes. I saw the cesspit, the basement, the shed. I saw my childhood slipping through my fingers without anyone trying to hold it back. The meeting took place in a small room near the main entrance. When I entered, my mother was sitting, hugging a battered handbag with deep-set eyes and hair that was grayer than I remembered. She stood up as soon as she saw me and wanted to hug me. I stood still. She stepped back, sat down again and started talking. She said she didn't know anything. If she had, she would have done something. That she believed my silence was the work of a quiet girl, not a hurt girl. I listened without interrupting. When she stopped, I took a deep breath and said, "You knew, and you chose not to look. And there's a difference between being blind and turning your face away." She cried, a lot. And I didn't cry, because at that moment I understood that my pain was mine alone, that no one was going to carry it for me, and that waiting for justice at home was the same as asking for help from those who pushed me. The sister came back, thanked me for the visit, and escorted my mother out. I went back to my room feeling something strange. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was as if that chapter had closed, but the story was still alive, throbbing like an open wound. The following days were heavy. My body reacted with nausea, my head ached frequently, and the memories came in waves. I began to suspect something, but it took me a while to accept it. Then, during a routine checkup, the nun nurse called me in for a chat. She said she needed to do a test. I froze. She explained calmly, asked if there was a possibility. I just nodded. And that same day, confirmation came. I was pregnant. The news hit me like a stone. I couldn't think, speak, or breathe. I was mute for hours. I went to bed, covered my head, and wished I could go back in time. But time, oh well, it only moves forward. And there I was, young and with a child growing inside me, the fruit of everything that no one had the courage to stop. Sister Agnes tried to be firm, but I could see that inside she was also shaken. She said that they would take care of me, that I wouldn't be expelled, that this place was meant to welcome, not punish. But I already knew that from then on, everything was going to change. The girls started to look at me differently, some with pity, others with fear, as if my belly was going to remind everyone of what could happen to anyone. I was removed from some activities. I started helping out in the kitchen, where the risks were lower. I went to bed earlier, took medication and had tests. The baby grew, and with it, rebellion. Because I didn't want that body to change, I didn't want to carry inside me something that had come from so much horror. But I also knew that it wasn't his fault, and it was this thought that kept me going. I started writing more. Almost every day, I wrote letters I never sent, stories I never told, conversations with myself. One night, I wrote to the baby. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. I didn't even know if I wanted to know. I just wanted him to know that I had no choice, that he wasn't a mistake, but he wasn't a dream either. that his life was going to start inside out, but that I was going to try, in whatever way I could, not to repeat what they had done to me. A month before giving birth, I dreamt about my grandfather for the first time in a long time. He was calling me from the shed door. I couldn't move my legs. I stood there, paralyzed, listening to him say that I was his, that I would always be his, and that no one was going to change that. I woke up screaming. The girls surrounded me. The nun came running. She thought it was a contraction. It wasn't. It was just the past remembering that still lived in me. The child was born on an April afternoon, a boy, small, wrinkled, crying. When he was placed in my arms, I felt no love or hate. I felt fear, fear of repeating, of failing, of not knowing how to look after him. I looked at him and thought, what do I do now? That first night with him on my lap was the longest of my life. I looked at the baby's wrinkled face, listened to the sound of his breathing, and felt between two worlds. One was the one that had brought me there, full of marks, pain, and silence. The other was the one that could come, but I didn't know if I'd be able to enter. The boy slept lightly, like someone who carries no weight, and I next to him, with a weight on my back that not even 1,000 lifetimes could lift. Over the next few days, I took care of him as instructed. I fed him milk, changed his diaper, and cleaned him up with trembling hands. Not for lack of practice, but for fear of making mistakes. There were times when I would look at him and feel a tightness in my chest, as if I were holding on to a piece of the past. At other times I found myself smiling at the little noises he made. It was confusing. It was all together. Love, repulsion, instinct, anger, affection, and inside me, a question that wouldn't leave me alone. Will I be able to protect him from what I had no way of avoiding? Sister Agnes came to visit me every afternoon. She said that the baby was growing well, that I was strong. I smiled with the corner of my mouth, but inside I doubted it, because being strong for me wasn't about looking after a child. It was surviving what he did. It was escaping with my body still in one piece. And now, with that little being looking at me as if I were the whole world, I realized how cruel the world could be. The months went by, and the girls began to get used to my presence with the baby. Some helped, others just watched. There was a younger one called Jenny, who stayed by my side whenever she could. She told me stories about her childhood, asked about my past, but I never said much. She understood, because most people there had the same kind of silence, the kind that weighs you down but doesn't need subtitles. It was on one of these afternoons, while I was breastfeeding and Jenny was braiding her hair while sitting next to me, that one of the nuns came into the room with an envelope. She called me into Sister Agnes's office. Inside, she said she had some news, that my grandfather had suffered a stroke. He was in hospital with part of his body paralyzed, and that my mother had sent a letter asking me to let her know. The first thing I thought was, this is a trap. Then came a strange relief, not joy. I've never wished anyone dead, but to know that that man was now half of what he used to be, it touched me. I didn't say anything. The sister waited a while, then asked if I wanted to answer the letter. I answered with a dry look. No. Over the next few weeks I heard comments that he was getting worse, that he no longer spoke, that he just stared at the ceiling, mumbling names. They said he was calling for me, that he repeated meaningless phrases as if asking for forgiveness. But I knew that people like that don't change with illness. They only get more dangerous. They only try to manipulate even when their breathing is labored. Even so, something began to grow inside me. It wasn't compassion. It was the need for closure, to look him in the face and show him that I was no longer the child he locked in a hole, that now I had a voice, that now I knew the names of things, and that even with everything he took from me, there was still something left in me that he couldn't destroy. I asked for permission to leave the center. Sister Agnes tried to dissuade me. She said it was dangerous, that it wasn't worth it. But I insisted. I said I needed it, that it was for me, and she understood. She arranged the visit, organized everything. I took my son with me. I wanted him to see who that man was. I wanted him, even if he didn't understand, to feel in the air what we carry when we survive hell. We arrived at the hospital late in the afternoon. The smell of disinfectant mixed with wilted flowers made me sick to my stomach. I was guided to the room. I entered slowly. He was lying down, with tubes connected to his nose, his eyes open but empty. His mouth was crooked, drooling. It was him, but he looked like someone else, a remnant of people, a piece of what was. I stood in the doorway with the baby on my lap. He turned his eyes slowly and saw me. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't recognize me, but he did. I saw it in his eyes. He tried to raise his hand but couldn't. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Just a noise. I didn't go any closer. I just said from where I was, "You destroyed me, but you didn't finish me off." He cried, or seemed to. I didn't cry. I never cried for him again. I left the room with my heart racing, but with a lighter soul. It was as if, for the first time, I had won without having to fight. I returned to the center with my son in my arms and a new certainty that I could raise him differently, that the cycle could stop there. In the following months, I dedicated myself to studying. I started writing again. I started teaching reading to the younger girls. The baby grew up healthy, strong, with a curious look on his face. Every time he smiled, I felt a piece of me coming back. And then, one day, I received another letter. This time, not from my mother. It was from the hospital lawyer. It said that my grandfather had died, that he had left a document, and that part of his estate was in my name. The first thing I thought was, this is a joke. The second thought was, I don't want anything. But then I realized that this could be a chance to start again with something he never imagined he'd give me. Freedom. I held the letter in my hands for hours. The crumpled envelope, the stamp in the corner, and those cold words saying that part of his estate was now mine. It seemed like a lie. He who used to throw me in the dark was now leaving me something? It didn't make any sense. Was it a trap? Was it guilt disguised as justice? Or just another way of trying to take control, even from the other side of the coffin? I showed it to Sister Agnes. She read everything calmly, analyzing each line as if she could find poison hidden between the letters. She said it was legitimate, that they had actually put my name in the will, the land for the house, part of the money in the bank, and what was left of the shed. It was more than I could have imagined. It was more than I wanted to have, because that man's inheritance didn't just come on paper. It came with history, with smell, with a choked cry. I spent days thinking about what to do. Throw it away? Refuse it? Use it? The thought of touching that money made me nauseous. But at the same time, I had a child in my arms, a child who wasn't to blame for anything, and who now depended on me not to repeat the script that ripped my childhood away from me. And that's when the decision came to me. I was going to accept, but not as thanks, not as acceptance. I was going to accept it like someone who takes a weapon from the enemy after the battle and points to the future. I went into town to sign the papers. The registry office was the same one where he went to pay bills, where he walked around with his hat on his head and the air of being the owner of everything. I walked in with the baby on my lap, head held high, eyes straight. When they said my name, I signed slowly, like someone writing a new story. The man from the firm looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. I knew why. Everyone there knew my grandfather, and no one thought I would outlive him. With the documents in hand, I went to see a lawyer, a firm woman with a dry voice and an intelligent look. I told her everything, not the sordid details, but enough for her to understand that I didn't just want to administer assets, I wanted to transform it. I asked to sell the house, the shed, everything. I said I wanted to get away from every wall he'd ever set foot on. She understood. She quickly put things in order. The money came, clean, dry, and in my hands it became a weapon against the past. The first thing I did was to get my son out of that shelter. I rented a small house in a neighboring town, away from everyone. A quiet place, with no curious neighbors, no deep-rooted history. I set up our corner simply but with dignity, a new crib, a decent mattress, a cupboard with clean clothes, something I never had. And there, in that different silence, I began to build a routine. I enrolled the little one in a nursery school when he came of age. I went back to studying at an evening school, taking care of the chores during the day. I worked doing sewing, embroidery, cleaning, whatever came up. The money from the sale helped, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. and I didn't want to live off what came from the hand of a monster. I wanted to create my own base. I started collecting every penny as if it were a brick, and each brick, for me, was a no that I shouted at everything that had been done to me. The nights were still difficult. Sometimes I woke up scared, feeling the weight of the basement, the pit, the shed. The smell would come back, the voices would come back, the feeling of being trapped would come back. But then I would look over and see my son sleeping peacefully, and that anchored me, because he was the opposite of what I had been. He had love, he had security, he had a choice. Time went by. He started walking, talking, laughing out loud, and every time I saw that, I felt a piece of my soul healing, not forgetting, because I don't forget, but learning to walk with the pain without letting it dominate me. He grew, and I grew with him. One day he came home from school with a piece of paper in his hand. He had drawn the house, the two of us, and a huge heart in the middle. He handed it to me smiling and said, "You're my home, Mom." It tore me apart inside, because no one had ever called me home. I'd always been a corner of a wall, a shadow in a corridor, a hidden hole, and now I was shelter. That was the day I decided that my story would no longer be kept hidden away, that other girls needed to hear it, that someone, somewhere, could be going through the same thing and thinking they were alone. I started writing for real. I put down on paper everything I remembered, carefully but clearly, not as revenge, but as a warning. I went to a social worker. I handed her my account. She read it in silence, her eyes watering. She said that my story could help many, that there were programs for protection, for support. She invited me to speak at a support group. I was scared, but I went. My voice was shaking, but I spoke. And in the end, several women came to hug me. One of them said, "You saved me today." And I understood. The voice he tried to erase was now a knife against silence. The letter arrived one morning, one of those mornings when you only expect bills or advertisements. I picked up the envelope at the gate without paying much attention. I only noticed it was different when I saw the sender written in old, crooked, almost illegible handwriting. His name was there. Even though he was dead, he was still trying to get through the cracks. I sat on the sofa with a cold hand and my heart beating faster than it should. I took 3 deep breaths before opening it. The paper was thick, yellowed, as if it had been written a long time ago, tucked away in a forgotten corner, waiting for the right time. The first sentence was an apology, but not the kind that heals, the kind that tries to clean up the mess without raising dust. He said that he knew what he had done, that he was aware of his actions, but that he also had a bad childhood, a cruel father and an absent mother, that he learned the worst way to be a man and was never able to get out of it. He talked about guilt, old age, the sleepless nights listening to my voice in his head. He said that I was his favorite granddaughter, that I was special, that he couldn't cope, that he'd tried to teach me things about life, but that he'd made a mistake and everything had gotten out of hand. I stopped reading at that point, because there, in that passage, he was trying to turn horror into learning, as if the things he had done had been misunderstandings, as if trapping a child in a hole was a lesson, as if touching a girl was misplaced affection. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, opened them again. I continued reading. At the end, he asked me to use the money he left me to do something good, to build something that would help other girls, that his name be remembered for something useful. There I laughed. Laughter was the only thing I could do, because to think that that man thought his name deserved any remembrance was the height of arrogance. I tore the letter into small pieces. I burned it in the backyard, sprinkling the ashes on the ground like someone returning a curse to where it came from. Then I went inside, looked at my son sleeping in his room, and felt a weight come off my shoulders, because at that moment I decided that I was no longer going to respond to the past. I was going to use everything I had, everything I'd achieved, to build something far away from his name. I went back to the social worker. I told her about the letter. She asked if I wanted to use some of the money to open a support center. She said she could help me with the paperwork. I thought about it for a few days, looked for information, talked to women in the city, psychologists and teachers. The idea began to take shape, not as a tribute, but as a breakthrough a space where girls could enter and know that there was no basement, no shed, no cesspit. There was listening, believed, protection. I rented an old building, renovated it with the help of people who understood my intention. I gave it the name of something that had no connection with it, a name that sounded light, strong, new. And there, with brick, paint, and voice, I began to give back to the world what they had taken from me. The first girls arrived with the same eyes I had back then, deep-set eyes, a closed mouth, a shrunken body. I knew how to decipher everything without them having to say anything, and every time one of them managed to smile, sit up straight, ask for help out loud, it was like a nail being pulled out of the coffin of silence. I continued writing. I published a small book with a fictitious name but a real soul. I received letters, invitations to speak at schools, groups, and events. And every time I spoke, I felt his echo inside me getting quieter. It wouldn't go away, it never will. But he doesn't shout like he used to. My son grew up seeing this, participating, helping, listening. One day, he asked me, "Why do you do all this, Mom?" I looked at him and said, "Because I don't want any girl to experience what I experience, and because I'm only here because of a lady who left the door closed." Today, he's aware of his history. He knows where he came from. He knows that he was born in the midst of pain, but raised in love. I never hid it from him. I always told him carefully, but truthfully, and he carries it with maturity. He's never used it as an excuse. He uses it as an impulse. Now, sitting here in my 87th year, looking at everything I built, I think, maybe I didn't win, like in the movies. Maybe I didn't shout victory from the top of a mountain. But every girl who calls me by name, every child who enters the center with fear and leaves with dignity, that for me is triumph. It's emotional revenge. It's justice that the system didn't give, but that time has allowed me to plant. And even with all that, there's still something I haven't told you, something I only discovered later, and which changed the way I looked at my mother. It was on an ordinary day, one of those days when you think nothing is going to happen, that the past decided to strike again. I was at the center organizing some old papers, sorting donations, seeing what still needed fixing. The room was empty, just the sound of the fans and the footsteps of the younger girls running down the corridor. Then a lady walked in. Her hair was in a loose bun, her clothes were simple, and her gaze was direct. She called me by name as if she already knew me. I asked her to sit down. She said she needed to talk. Her voice trembled, as if she had been carrying something for decades. She said her name was Pauline. She lived in the same town where I grew up. She was my mother's neighbor for a long time. When I heard that, my stomach tightened. It wasn't often that someone came up wanting to relive memories, tell old stories. But she didn't seem curious. She seemed distressed. She took a yellowed photograph out of her handbag. It was my mother, young, next to an older woman I didn't recognize. Pauline told me that she had met my mother when she was almost a girl, that they worked together in a sewing factory. They shared lunch boxes, shared sadness. She said that my mother was never much of a talker, but that she once told her a secret, that when she was younger she suffered at the hands of a relative, an older man from the family. She never said his name. She only said that he did things when the house was asleep. Pauline said that she tried to help, but at that time nobody believed in girls. She said that my mother ran away, disappeared for a few months, and when she came back, she was already married to my father. I sat in silence, listening to all this, my heart racing. Pauline continued. She said that after my mother got married, she moved cities and had children. Many years later, they met again by chance, and that my mother, her eyes already tired, said a phrase that Pauline never forgot. I thought that if I pretended not to see, evil wouldn't happen to her too, and that was me. At that moment, everything stopped. The chair felt harder, the air heavier. Pauline held my hand. She said she hadn't had the courage to tell me before, that only now, after hearing about the center, after hearing my story in an interview on the local radio station, did she understand that she needed to speak. I couldn't think of anything, just the sentence. Pretend I didn't see, as if closing my eyes could stop the world from happening. After she left, I sat for hours. Every memory of my mother played like a fast-moving movie. The times she looked away, changed the subject, said I was imagining it. That time in the kitchen when she combed my hair and whispered that it didn't look like that with my grandmother, the nights when she pretended to sleep too heavily to hear what was going on in the next room, it was all a choice. She knew that. She'd lived through it, and instead of breaking the cycle, she pushed it forward. She thought that silence was protection, that pretending was enough. I didn't cry, not that day, nor afterwards. The hurt had already turned into something else. It was a mixture of pity, anger, and tiredness, because no one warned me that a woman's legacy can be the silence she swallows so as not to scream. Over the next few days, I changed. The girls noticed. Some asked if everything was all right. I replied with a nod. It wasn't new pain. It was old pain, disguised as surprise. And when you discover that you come from a line of silent women, you begin to understand the depth of loneliness. I told my son. I waited for him to come home from school, sat with him on the sofa. I spoke calmly. I told him that there was another woman before me, that the mother who gave birth to me was also a wounded girl, that she didn't know how to protect me because she was never protected. He listened attentively. In the end, he hugged me. He said, "So that's why you are the way you are." I replied that maybe, or maybe it's because I decided to be the opposite. I started writing again, but this time not about me, about her, about my mother. I tried to understand her story without justifying it, not to forgive, but not to repeat, because understanding is not absolving. It means looking clearly. It means taking off the blindfold and facing what you carry in your blood. And what I carry, my dear, is the certainty that I was the first to break the cycle, the last to suffer silently. There was little left now, but before it ended, there was one last thing, something I've kept until now, because the day he died, there was one detail that nobody knew, one that only I knew, and that, in a way, was the only moment when I felt like the world had taken a step backwards just to let me pass. On the day he died, I was washing clothes in the tank at the center. It was a hot, sunny day. The girls were playing in the courtyard, and all I could think about was finishing soon to prepare lunch. I didn't even remember that he still existed, or maybe I pretended not to give the day the peace it always tried to steal. Then the phone rang. One of the girls answered and came to call me. She said it was a man from the hospital. I went into the room and picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was dry. He told me the time of death, the location, and asked if I wanted to keep the belongings. I said no. I thanked him for the call, and I hung up. I went back to the tank as if nothing had happened. I continued washing, scrubbing, rinsing, as if the news had flowed away with the dirty water. But inside me, something changed. It was as if a part of my body had been given time off after years of forced service, as if the tired soul could finally sit down. In the late afternoon, I went to the room where I kept my papers. I opened the box containing my writings, letters, records, drafts of everything I'd been through. I took out a blank sheet of paper. I wrote just one line. It's over. I folded it up and put it between the others, because sometimes what sets you free isn't a scream. It's definitive silence. Only a week later, I received another call. This time it was a woman, a nurse. She said she'd been looking after him for the last few days, that he no longer spoke, only mumbled. But before he blacked out for good, he repeated one thing. He said my name, and he said a sentence that nobody understood, but she wrote it down. I asked her to read it to me. The woman took a deep breath and said, "She'll see." I left everything ready. At that moment, my blood ran cold, because that sentence had a threatening tone. It wasn't remorse, it was a warning, and I knew it. Even dead, he was still trying to mark his territory. I tried not to think about it, but your head doesn't respect order. I spent days with that phrase running around inside me, trying to decipher what he meant. I started going through the documents, the things he had left behind. I spoke to the lawyer and asked her to check everything again. She found it, a second envelope, kept in the safe at the registry office, with instructions to be delivered after the reading of the will. Inside, a smaller letter and a key. The letter said that there was a secret room in the shed, behind a false wall, that there he kept important things, that one day I would want to see it. It made me sick, but I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know. I went back to town. I asked to enter the shed before the final sale. I went alone. I went in with the key in my hand, holding my breath. The place was just as I remembered it. The smell, the wood, the dirt floor. I walked slowly to the back. I looked for the wall. I knocked until I found the hollow sound. I moved some boards aside, and there it was, a crack with a lock. The key fell into place. I turned it. What was inside was no surprise, but it was proof. Boxes with notebooks, photos, objects, his things, my things, papers with notes about me, days, times, little texts where he talked about me as if I were something, drawings. I felt myself being invaded again, not by his body, but by the memory of every time he tried to erase me. I left carrying just one notebook. I threw the rest away. I burned it. I turned my back without looking. I took the notebook to the center. I showed it to the social worker. She was amazed. She said it was enough to prove a lot, but I didn't want a trial. I didn't want a posthumous judgment. I just wanted it to serve as a warning, that no one would ever say she made it up again, because I had lived every line, and now everyone could see it. A few months later, I published a new book, not under his name, or mine, an invented name, a real story, telling it all, with the clarity that only maturity brings. Some people cried, people who revolted, people who said they knew, but they never did anything. And for them, my silence was my answer. Today, at the age of 87, sitting here with the sun setting behind the window, I think about everything. The time I lost, what I've achieved, what still hurts, and what now no longer hurts. My son has grown up. He's become a good man. He works with children. He says he wants to be the kind of adult he would have needed if he had been a girl. I look at him and think, the world is safe as long as we don't repeat it, as long as someone breaks it. I was that someone, the last in line who said enough is enough, the one who climbed out of the hole and built a house so that others wouldn't fall in. And if you've heard this far, know one thing, no pain is in vain if we transform. And what he tried to bury, I gave birth to a flower.